So the highly anticipated first pay-per-view of 2025 is just about here, and that is UFC 311. Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2, the highly anticipated rematch. And then the co-main event that has absolutely stolen the show between Merab Dvalishvili and Umar Nurmagomedov. And not only are those two of my most anticipated fights of 2025, but they're happening on the very first pay-per-view of the year. And from top to bottom, guys, this card is stacked. This is an absolutely stacked pay-per-view that the UFC has put together here. And I'm really looking forward to this, right? This dated back to UFC 310, the lead up to, to that event. They did a pop-up presser to promote UFC 311, and Merab and Umar, they had some crazy back and forth, right? And that absolutely stole the show and just got everyone buzzing about this event to where we were like, man, screw UFC 310, just get us to UFC 311. We had Umar up there going, hey, Merab, tell me what I say. And then we had Merab, I always respectful for you. You have to be man first. You piece of shit, okay? Like, we had this crazy back and forth between the two, and it was just absolutely great. And that's what's stolen the show and put some extra steam heading into this card here. From top to bottom, man, very, very good card. I'm excited to break this one down. I'm going to be going through the entire card, giving my predictions and breakdowns. So if you enjoy these kinds of videos, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. Let's rock and roll right into this thing, starting with our very first fight of the evening. Flyweight division between Ulanbekov and Clayton Carpenter. Now, to me, this is a very straightforward matchup, right? With Ulanbekov, we know he's part of Team Habib, right? Those Dagestan guys, they have outstanding grappling. The way they chain things together, the way they use the grappling to control you, ultimately to find submissions or land vicious ground and pound is second to none and some of the best in the sport. And I think in this fight, that's kind of what this comes down to, right? Is a grappling battle here because Clayton Carpenter, he's a guy that's been on the rise, right? He's coming over from LFA. They've put out some pretty good pros into the UFC. He's a finisher, right? He's got good submission skills. He's got pretty decent striking on the feet like we saw against Rodney over in LFA, his final LFA fight, getting a KO on the feet, comes over to the UFC in the Contender Series against Edgar Chairez, goes out there and wins a nice decision over Edgar. And if you're beating Chairez, that's a pretty solid win, right, on the Contender Series because Edgar Chairez, he's tough, he's durable, he's a scrappy, well-rounded fighter. That's a pretty solid win, right? So if you could go out there and control Edgar Chairez and get a W, that is going to put people on notice in the division. And then he goes out there against Ronderos and finds a submission. And in his most recent outing 2 months ago against Lucas Roca, finds another submission. So what we have here is a guy in Clayton Carpenter who is believing in his skill set. He's got very, very good submissions. He's slick with the grappling, and I think that he is pretty decent on the feet to where he could cause some issues for Tiger if it takes place on the feet. But what we have seen from Ulanbekov thus far, going out there against Bruno Silva 4 years ago, getting a decision, getting the split decision over Nascimento, that's where I was like, man, is Ulanbekov, like, is he as good as what people are saying? And then he goes out there against Tim Elliott, and he suffers this was a tough defeat to me, right? Because I feel like this was a fight that Tagir should have won because Tim Elliott, kind of a veteran, a crafty guy who's been around for a while. He, that's where weaponizing experience inside the UFC was on display here because Elliott's got pressure, pace, the way he chains everything together can cause some issues for a guy. We saw that in this fight here, but then this is where we finally saw Ulanbekov start to take things in stride. Gets a submission victory over Nate Maness, then goes out there against Cody Durden, who's a tough, durable guy who likes to push forward, goes out there and gets a submission victory against him. This was an impressive performance from Ulanbekov. And what we've seen from Tiger, right, a guy that it says he's 5'7", I don't think he's 5'7", right? I've seen pictures of him out there with Islam Makhachev and those guys. He looks taller than that, right? So he's a tall, lanky guy for the weight class, and I think that he will utilize that. He's wiry, he's scrappy, and when it comes to the grappling, I think that's what this comes down to. He is the better overall grappler. He's got very good wrestling, chains things together, has this submission threat. I think that this is a little too much too soon for Clayton Carpenter, but Clayton Carpenter is dangerous. Do not overlook him in this. I could see Ulanbekov maybe finding a submission in this, but because of how good Clayton has been that we've seen so far in the grappling, I'm going to go Tiger by decision in this one. Moving on. We have Grant Dawson versus Diego Ferreira. Now, I have Grant Dawson winning this by decision, right? And for me, What we've seen from Dawson since he's been in the UFC is he has outstanding wrestling, right? He's got very good control. He just has this way to get to guys, control them, pressure them up against the fence, drag you down, and just dominate you when it comes to the wrestling. And what we've seen from Diego Ferreira on this losing streak here that he had was he went out there against Beneil Dariush, lost by split decision. Not a bad loss, right? At this time, Beneil Dariush was a solid guy in the division, goes out there and gets finished by Gregor Gillespie. Who's Gregor? A guy that has pretty solid wrestling and decent ground and pound, and he got Ferreira out of there. Goes out there against Mateusz Gamrot, who, Gamrot's a tough customer, right? He's got very good wrestling, he's got some good ground and pound, and his pace is absolutely relentless when it comes to the wrestling. So this one, I don't fault him too much, but when you look into that a little bit, stylistically, those are two guys that are very similar to what a Grant Dawson could bring to the table. But then we saw Diego Ferreira start to take things in stride. Goes out there against Michael Johnson, lands a vicious overhand right that absolutely sleeps him. And poor Michael Johnson, man. Michael Johnson goes out there, he looks good, whatever, and then just F's around and gets caught by a nasty shot here. Then Ferreira goes out there against Mateusz Rebecki and gets a vicious ground and pound finish over Rebecki. And look, Rebecki, he was a guy coming into that he was a prospect on the rise, right? People were like, this is the next, top guy in the division. He's got power. He's relentless. He's this slugger, man. Watch him fight. And he goes in there and he's doing pretty well, but then he gasses. And Diego Ferreira, one of those guys that understands how to weaponize experience inside the UFC. And one of the downfalls to me, he's 40 years of age. And I know he's on a 2-fight win streak, but coming in against a guy in Grant Dawson who has UFC experience, is a guy on the rise right now that is just really hitting his stride. And outside of that, that crazy, starch and KO by Bobby Green in the first round, Grant Dawson's been pretty dominant, right? He goes out there, he beats Damir Ismagulov, who is a very game opponent, is able to get a win over him, submits Mark Madsen, goes in there against Joe Selecki, dominates him in the grappling, goes out there and gets a finish over Rafa Garcia, and has a very funny post-fight interview after that. But Grant Dawson, he might not have the most exciting style, but he has a style that is going to be troubling for Diego Ferreira. But I could see a scenario where Diego Ferreira, he could find a finish, right? Because we have seen Grant Dawson hurt. We have seen if you can get to him, you can put him out. But again, if Bobby Green doesn't land that shot and we see Grant Dawson just get a hold of him, he does what he does and probably ends up dominating Bobby Green and finding a submission or something like that in that matchup. But shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? It happened how it happened. But the one thing I want to point out about Diego Ferreira, he's one of the better jiu-jitsu guys in MMA that utilizes it to negate the wrestling. Now, he has had some issues when he's in there against top flight grapplers like a Mateusz Gamrot, but he utilizes the submissions to create space, threaten with them to get back to the feet to where he can try to pick you apart with the striking. So if Grant Dawson cannot control him with the wrestling and the grappling and keep the fight on the floor, I think Grant Dawson's going to be in some trouble, because I think Ferreira has the better striking. He has power. He's got the experience. And again, if Dawson gets reckless in the grappling, Diego Ferreira could possibly find a submission. But I think Grant Dawson, his grappling, it's just on another level right now. His pace, his pressure, the way he is just able to control guys. I have Dawson getting this one done by decision. Moving on, we have Ricky Turcios versus Bernardo Sopaj. Now, this is a kind of a weird fight to me, because Ricky Turcios, I'm just going to be real, I'm disappointed in Ricky Turcios. I don't want to say high expectations, but we saw him come into the UFC, right? We saw him on, The Ultimate Fighter. Before that, he was a guy that he had slick submissions. He was kind of awkward and quirky. He comes on to The Ultimate Fighter, and then he gets the split decision win over Brady Hastan. Keep that in mind, split decision. Goes out there, loses to Ayman Zahabi, who's a guy that is just on a tear right now in the division. Then goes out there, wins another split decision against Kevin Nativad, and then goes out there against Raul Rosas and loses by submission. Now, okay, so you lost to Raul, right? That was one of the better grappling prospects on the rise in this weight class. I don't really have a problem with that. But if you're going to pick Ricky Turcios, he's a guy that's barely winning fights in the UFC. He's winning by a split decision every time so far, and he's just a scrappy guy, right? He's not particularly great in any one area. He's got decent striking, decent submissions, decent grappling, but he's very vulnerable to being taken down. And if you can pressure him and back him up against the fence and you don't kind of fall into the trap of this awkward style that Ricky has, you can absolutely get to him. And All Stars Training Center, is a great gym. They've had Hamzat Chimaev, Alexander Gustafsson. They got some really good fighters over there. And Bernardo is very, very well coached. And I understand he's coming off of a loss to Vinicius Oliveira. That was not just a loss. It was a highlight reel KO from Oliveira that absolutely slept Bernardo. So whenever you come off of a loss, especially like that, where you get made a highlight, where are you coming back from that? Are you mentally kind of back in it? Are you going to be a little shy and a little tentative? So if we see that kind of fighter from Bernardo, then I think Ricky may be able to find a way to beat him. But I think overall, Bernardo, he's a guy that has tremendous power in terms of the striking. We saw that prior to getting to the UFC, to where he rattled out a 3-fight win streak to where he was just absolutely starching people. But if you can get to this guy, if you can push the pace on him, you can mix things up, you can find a way to beat Bernardo. But I think from top to bottom, Bernardo is a better overall mixed martial artist that I feel like I can trust more than just this scrappy guy in Ricky Turcios, who's not particularly good in any one area. I think Bernardo's power is going to be a problem to where Ricky is going to have to be careful. So again, could Ricky pull it off? Sure he could, but I think Bernardo is the better overall fighter. That's why I'm picking him to get this one done. Moving on, no mystery here. I am riding with Peyton Talbott over Ronnie Barcelos. Listen, I'm all in on the Peyton Talbott hype train, right? At first, I was kind of like, who is this guy Talbott, right? Before he gets, he's kind of, gets to the UFC here. He's on the Contender Series, wins by decision. I'm like, okay. Goes out there, gets a submission over Nick, and I'm like, okay, well, what do we have here? Then he goes out there against Cameron Simon 8 months ago and puts on an absolute beatdown on Cameron Simon. And if you're doing that to Cameron Simon, I mean, you're going to be turning heads, because I know Cameron's not a world beater in the weight class, but, he trains with Dracus du Plessis. He's very well coached. He's a solid fighter. He's got a very good overall skill set. You wouldn't have known. He got absolutely dominated by Peyton Talbott in all aspects of MMA. So to do that, I mean, that's incredibly impressive. And then right after that, goes out there against Giannis Gamori and finishes him with a missile right hand right down the pipe that slept him bad very early on. That was a very, very impressive performance by Peyton Talbott. He's aggressive. He's got outstanding striking, very good timing, very good speed, and better yet, very good distance management. He can put his foot on the gas, get in your face, but stays just at the edge of range to where he can let that nasty right hand go and just put guys out. And what we've seen from Ronnie Barcelos, he's just a guy that seems like it's kind of coming to an end, right? I know he's coming off of a win here against Christian Quinones, but look, he's 37 years of age, and prior to this win, he lost to Kyler Phillips, right? Who I know Kyler Phillips is he's like a hurricane in there when it comes to the striking. He's just kind of all over the place, very dynamic, kind of a puzzle when it comes to the striking in there. So no harm, no foul. This is a good fighter in the division. Then he goes out there and gets nastily KO'd by Umar Nurmagomedov, who no harm, no foul. Umar Nurmagomedov, I think, is one of the best fighters in the division and probably of all time. We'll see if he can get through Merab. And then, he goes out there and beats Trevin Jones, and then he loses to Victor Henry. So what we've seen from Ronnie Barcelos, kind of up and down, up and down, up and down. And considering he's 37 years of age, going in there against another top flight prospect on the rise, I think Peyton Talbott is going to be aggressive, get in his face fast, not give him any space to operate, not even allow Ronnie to even think when it comes to the fight, and Peyton's just going to put him out very, very quickly. And if Barcelos can survive that, and he can turn this into a little bit of a dogfight, maybe he can find some success. But Peyton does have good grappling. He's got good submissions of his own, so I'm not too worried coming into this fight as a Peyton Talbott supporter coming to this. I think Peyton Talbott finds a finish very quickly in this matchup against Barcelos. But again, if Barcelos can drag it out, make it a dogfight, of course, he could possibly find a chance. I don't think it happens. I think Peyton Talbott makes quick work of him. Moving on, we have Zachary Reese versus Cedricus Dumas. This is kind of an interesting fight to me, right? Because Zachary Reese, he's a guy that outside of that loss to Cody Brundage to where he got Batista bombed, I mean, if that doesn't happen and that kind of weird situation doesn't happen and the fight kind of plays out, I feel like Zachary Reese can find a victory there, right? What we've seen from Cody Brundage, he hasn't been very impressive inside the UFC. I think if you run that one back, Zachary Reese would get that one back. But before getting to the UFC, finding a finish, goes out there on the Contender Series, gets an armbar, the loss to Brundage, then goes out there, makes easy work of Julian Marquez, which was a very impressive finish, and then goes out there against Jose Medina. This is where some things got a little dicey, right? Because with Zachary Reese, he's aggressive. He's got decent striking on the feet, but one of the downfalls, in my opinion, that I'm kind of waiting for somebody to take advantage of, which we kind of saw a little bit against Medina, is Zachary Reese is 6'4", right? He's a tall guy for the weight class. I know there's some big middleweights nowadays, but he's a tall guy. He's got a 77-inch reach, and normally when you see these taller guys, they kind of rely on just kind of pulling their head out of the way with the defense. They drop their hands. They don't have that great of head movement, and that's what you see with Zachary. While he does have decent striking technique, he kind of lacks when it comes to the defense, and that concerns me coming into a fight with Cedricus Dumas, who's quick, he's wiry, and he does have snappy striking. But what we've seen from Zachary outside of the Medina fight, where he got tested and had to, fight through and because he got tired and he had to fight through fatigue and ultimately found a victory over a durable Medina, because Zachary Reese hit him with a lot of shots that I think would have put a lot of other guys out. So, credit to Medina for showing his toughness. But outside of that, Reese was just kind of running through everybody. And then with Dumas, he's got snappy striking. He's a guy that's 6'2", so he can kind of match the reach and the striking when it comes to Zachary Reese. He does have a longer reach here at 79 inches. And then he goes out there against Denis Tululin, gets the victory, goes out there against Nursultan Ruziboev. I have an asterisk next to this, because against Ruziboev, Ruziboev eye poked him, and then the referee didn't stop it, and so we kind of had a funky situation there. And then before that, 2 wins. Goes out there, beats a Zaitar by decision, beats Cody Brundage by decision, and then did suffer the loss to Joshua Friend where he got submitted, which that's kind of a red flag, right? Because when I look at Zachary Reese, a guy that has power, a guy that likes to push you up against the fence and make you work and has solid grappling, I think that's the path to victory for Zachary Reese in this matchup. Utilize the striking to set up the grappling, push him up against the fence, take him down. Maybe Reese finds a submission, but I see him just kind of dominating Cedricus Dumas in terms of the grappling, ragdolling him around, and winning a dominant decision victory over Cedricus Dumas. I got Zachary Reese getting this one done. Moving on, we have Eileen Perez versus Carol Rosa. Now, to me, I'm riding with the hype train here. I think Eileen Perez, not only can the girl twerk, man, she has a very dominant fighting style, what we have seen on this 4-fight win streak that she is on, right? We saw it recently here against Dariush. She goes out there and gets a submission. Goes out there against Jocelyn Edwards, controls her in the grappling, right? And that's kind of the name of the game with Eileen Perez. Put her foot on the gas, get in your face, make you work, make you tired, push you up against the fence, take you down, find a submission. That's the name of her game, right? She doesn't have the best striking, but the way that she is just able to get to people with the grappling has just been a world of problems. And she is someone that can win a dominant decision. And if it turns into a dogfight, she's someone that can dig deep, someone that can rely on possibly pulling off a submission. But I think the pressure, the confidence that she has coming into this is going to be a problem for Carol Rosa, who struggled in some of these, the fights along the way here. Yes, she goes out and wins a decision over Pani Kianzad. Kianzad has some holes in the grappling, right? When it comes to the striking, Kianzad's got good boxing, but outside of that, she's kind of been exposed for having a lot of holes in her game when it comes to the grappling. Goes out there, loses a decision to Arena Aldana. No harm, no foul. I think Alreina has some of the best boxing in women's MMA, period. Goes out there, wins a split decision over Yana Santos, loses to Norma Dumont. Again, she's losing to some of the better fighters inside the weight class, and then does get a decision win over Lena here. But overall, I think Eileen Perez, the way that she strings things together, the pace, the pressure when it comes to the grappling is going to be too much for Carol Rosa. I'm buying in with Eileen Perez. I think the grappling, the way that she's able to put a pace on people, it's going to be a problem for Carol Rosa. I think Perez gets this one done by decision. Moving on to the light heavyweight division, we have Johnny Walker versus Bogdan Guskov, Lionheart Smith. We have Anthony Smith's twin over here, Bogdan Guskov. Not a lot to break down here. Look, Johnny Walker at one point in time, we were looking at this guy as, man, he could be the next best thing at light heavyweight. He could be a future superstar. He's got this, personality. He's outgoing, this crazy style. He, can knock people out. And I'm like, look, Johnny Walker, he might be that guy. And then all along the way, we've just seen him kind of get exposed, right? He's a guy that seems like he's lost a little bit of steam. He goes out there and he's able, to nastily KO Paul Craig. And it's like, who isn't KOing or beating up on Paul Craig at this point? Then goes out there and wins over Anthony Smith. You're attacking my family. That was that fight. Goes out there, beats up an old Anthony Smith, and then goes out there and gets absolutely violently KO'd by Magomed Ankalaev, and then gets violently KO'd again against Volkan Oezdemir. Johnny Walker should be a stuntman. The way that this dude, when he gets KO'd, I mean, the reactions are crazy. He's like throwing his arms up in the air. He's just getting KO'd stiff against Volkan Oezdemir. I mean, some scary KO reactions from Johnny Walker. And I'm being serious. Like, they are terrifying the way that this man has been KO'd. And I feel like he has taken a lot of damage over at least those past two fights and really throughout his career, to where Bogdan Guskov, he has outstanding power. He's aggressive. He's a guy that is just putting them together, man. Goes out there, gets a nasty finish over Ryan Spann. Yes, I know Ryan Spann's inconsistent. I know Ryan Spann, we just don't know which guy's going to show up. But that was, we've seen Ryan Spann kind of put it together a little bit recently. And Guskov goes out there, violently gets a finish over him. Goes out there, finishes Zach Palga with a nasty combination on the feet. And then, yes, he did get submitted by Volkan Oezdemir. That's Volkan Oezdemir. He is a world-class fighter in this division. And then before that, what we've seen, the power of Guskov is a problem. I think it's nothing different. I think he closes down Johnny Walker in the first round. Walker will be kind of fancy, moving around, making Bogdan a little cautious. And then in the second round, we will see Guskov put his foot on the gas, close the distance, and land a nasty shot that puts Johnny Walker out of there. I got Guskov by second round KO. Moving on to the light heavyweight division, we have a very interesting grappling matchup between Jailton Almeida and Sergey Spivac. So to me, when it comes to the striking, I don't really think anyone's particularly better than the other. Maybe Spivac is a little bit better than Almeida. Both guys they want to get this fight to the floor. They have good grappling, and what we've seen from Spivac, he's kind of dangerous, right? We've seen that if he can take you down and control you, he could get guys out of there, whether it's a submission or a ground and pound finish like we saw against Greg Hardy. Another one against Augustus Sakai, goes out there, finishes Derek Lewis with an arm triangle. But he goes out there against Gane, who's a fast guy for the weight class, right? That's a key factor here. Speed of Cyril Gane was able to just pick apart and get Spivac out of there. And then he goes out there and finishes Marcin Tybura, who has pretty decent grappling of his own. That's an impressive victory from Spivac. But when I look at someone like Jailton Almeida, who has a little bit of an X factor in the heavyweight division, right? A guy that is very explosive, very fast, very quick, and just very speedy. That's a problem for a lot of heavyweights. And that's why I said if Jailton Almeida, my big critique from him, the guy's got to be meaner, right? He has outstanding grappling, very good timing on his takedown entries, very good submissions. He's just not mean, right? He laid on Derek Lewis for 5 rounds and did damn near nothing, right? He goes out there, gets a finish over Shamil, goes out there and gets a submission over Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And this fight right here with Lewis, he could have finished Derek Lewis, I think, right? He could have probably found a submission or landed some ground and pound. He just lays on guys. He lays on guys and doesn't always have that killer instinct, which I think can be a problem at times. And we saw that against Curtis Blaydes. He came out and just tried to have a straight grappling match with Curtis Blaydes. I picked him to get upset in this because I was like, look, Blaydes, I think, can fend off the takedowns. I think Blaydes has power and he can take advantage of the lack of hands that Almeida has. That's exactly what we saw from Curtis Blaydes. And again, Almeida is not mean enough at times, but if he is mean and he utilizes his speed, he is absolutely a problem like we saw against Alexander Romanov. I think the speed of Jailton Almeida, the way that he enters with the takedowns, the way that he times them, he throws that front kick up the middle to back you up against the fence. I think he's able to get a hold of Sergey Spivac. He's the better grappler. He has better submissions, and he is faster. That is the key thing in this for me, is the speed of Almeida, I think, gives Spivac problems. I think he finds a submission. I could see it happening in the first round, but I'm going to go second round by Almeida. I think Spivac will get tired as the fight plays out. Moving on, we have Rina Nakamura versus Gafurov. Now, I'm going Nakamura by finish, right? What we've seen from Nakamura since he's came over into the UFC, dangerous striking, fun style to watch, goes out there, gets the decision win over Vera, goes out there, wins a decision against Garcia, and then before that, the nasty straight left hand down the middle against Kazama. I mean, and then on road to the UFC, like we've seen what Nakamura, like there's hype behind this guy for a reason. He's a finisher, he's got explosive striking, and I think that that's going to be a little bit too much for Gafurov in this matchup. And I know he's coming off of a decision win over Kang, but before that, we got to see what could happen, right? He goes in there against Said Nurmagomedov, who is a very, very good fighter, so no harm, no foul. He gets submitted there, then goes out there against John Castaneda and loses by decision. But before that, we saw a couple finish wins prior to getting to the UFC, but I just think Nakamura, the hype behind this guy, I think is real. I think the explosiveness on the feet, the danger that he presents at all times is going to be a problem for Gafurov. I have Nakamura getting a late finish in the third round as this fight plays out. I think it's close, kind of back and forth, and then a shot lands from Nakamura later in the fight and is able to put him out of there. I have Nakamura by third round finish. Moving on to one of the more interesting fights on the card between Beneil Dariush and Renato Moicano. This is interesting to me because Renato Moicano, I mean, ever since this loss that he, suffered against RDA, which he stepped in, I believe it was like 5-day notice to go in there for, I think it was 5 rounds against RDA. He's just been on an absolute tear. Goes out there, gets a submission victory over Brad Riddell. Goes out there and dominates Drew Dober with the grappling. Goes out at UFC 300 against Jalen Turner to where he got tuned up like a guitar on the feet. Jalen Turner was putting the beating on Renato Moicano, tried to walk off, for a KO and try to showboat a little. Didn't work out because Moicano was still there. The ref didn't stop the fight. Moicano comes back, gets the takedown, finishes Jalen Turner with some ground and pound. That's why you got to fight till the ref pulls you off, man, because that is a perfect example right there. Then goes out there in France against Benoit Saint-Denis, violently beats the shit out of Benoit Saint-Denis, man. I mean, this was like a new version of Renato Moicano that was unlocked in France, man. Goes out there, takes Benoit Saint-Denis down very, very easily. I mean, we haven't seen anyone do that to Saint-Denis. I know we saw Poirier knock him out, which I picked Poirier to beat Saint-Denis because of the lack of defense when it comes to the boxing from Saint-Denis. But, outside of that, Saint-Denis had a lot of success against Poirier with the grappling. We've never seen someone go out there and just dominate Saint-Denis with the grappling. That's exactly what Renato did. Took him down and beat him up with some nasty, nasty ground and pound. That was like the new version of Moicano, that angry Moicano, goes out there and just, slicing him up with elbows. The doctor has to step in and stop it. This is a new version of Moicano. And I think from what we have seen from Beneil Dariush, a guy who, was on a nice win streak, got the split decision over Ferreira, beats up on Tony Ferguson, goes out there and beats Mateusz Gamrot. Those are some decent wins, right? I mean, the Tony Ferguson one doesn't look so great now, and then goes out there, gets KO'd by Charles Oliveira, gets KO'd by Arman Tsarukyan, getting KO'd by two of the best guys in the division. So I don't look at that too much, right? Because the competition's very good. But it's the fact that you got KO'd twice. You got KO'd twice, back to back. What kind of guy are we going to see? A guy that's 35 years of age. Benny never got to fight for the title. I feel like that was kind of a weird situation. He was kind of on the cusp of fighting for a title, never got his opportunity, was on that long win streak. He finds himself in a hard matchup here because Moicano is also 35, but he is riding all the momentum right now. A 4-fight win streak. His striking has gotten better. While Moicano doesn't have all the power on the feet, I think he has decent striking enough to where he can hang with Dariush on the feet. He has more volume than Dariush, I think. And when it comes to the grappling, I think he's more vicious with the ground and pound, at least what we've seen recently. And when it comes to the grappling, Moicano, I think, has very good takedowns. I think he can kind of control Dariush, but Dariush, he's very scrambly. He's got very good jiu-jitsu, very good submission skills of his own. So I could see Dariush pulling off some sort of a submission here or landing a big shot on the feet. But I think what we've seen from Moicano, he's able to land some shots on the feet, utilize the volume, take Dariush down, and land some more ground and pound. I think he's going to try to go back to that, knowing this is his one big run in the UFC. I think that's how Renato is approaching this. The ground and pound, the elbows, and he's going to try to slice up Dariush, see if he can get another stoppage. I think he does. I'm going Renato Moicano by second round finish. I think he lights him up with some elbows. Moving on to the middleweight division, we have Kevin Holland versus Rainer de Ridder, the new guy from One Championship. Reinier de Ridder, when he came over, I was excited to see what he could do, right? He has good grappling. He's someone that, he has a unique skill set. He can cause some problems, and that is exactly what he was able to do over in one to become a champion, was utilize the grappling to just dominate people. But what we saw in that, that first UFC fight against Gerald Meerschaert, it was a disaster. And I know Gerald Meerschaert has good submissions and has decent grappling. You would have thought Gerald Meerschaert was a world-class striker in there. He was teeing off on Reinier de Ridder. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, GM3's out there, he's slinging. He's landing at will. And I'm like, that's not a good look for Reinier de Ridder. So, coming into this against Kevin Holland, Kevin Holland's a way better striker than Gerald Meerschaert, right? But what does concern me for Kevin is at middleweight. What is giving Kevin Holland problems? It's not necessarily the strikers, right? Down at, welterweight, he stood with Wonderboy Thompson, which was a mistake. Goes out there. Yes, he landed some good shots on Wonderboy, but it's the guys that have a size advantage and have a grappling advantage, specifically with the wrestling, that can dominate Kevin Holland and take him down and control him. So if Reinier de Ridder comes in with a grapple-heavy game plan, I could absolutely see him, getting a hold of Kevin Holland, taking him down and controlling him, maybe finding a submission. But from what I saw in that Gerald Meerschaert fight, it was a disaster in my opinion. And I think there's levels to this, right? He goes out there and he's getting, some wins and suffered a couple defeats over in one. I think the striking and the speed of Kevin Holland is going to cause him some problems. And Kevin Holland is a guy that fought at 170. He's at 185 first, goes to 170, kind of bouncing around. But I think that at 185, he is fast on the feet. He's got a good straight right hand. And when he takes it serious and he shows up and he takes it serious, Kevin Holland can hang with some of these guys, in the division, in my opinion. And he goes out there, gets a submission over Michael Chiesa, loses to Jack Della Maddalena, goes out there, stands with Michael Venom Page and gets teed off on. And then he gets the victory, due to armbar over Mikhail Olazechuk. And he's coming off of a loss to Roman Dolidze, to where he suffered a rib injury. I think Kevin Holland is a better striker. I think he has decent submissions as well. But I think that what we saw from Reinier de Ridder against Gerald Meerschaert is incredibly alarming to me, and I can't pick him in this fight. Again, he comes in, grapple heavy, could control Holland, take him down, utilize the grappling. Absolutely, I could see him winning. But if he can't get Holland down and this fight plays out on the feet, I think Kevin Holland has a field day in terms of striking. I'm going Kevin Holland by second round finish, because if Holland doesn't get a finish, I think de Ridder can get to him with the grappling and win on the scorecards. Moving on to one of the more intriguing matchups to me on the card, and that is the Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prochazka matchup. Man, I went back and forth on this one. I went back and forth on this one, and this one pains me, man, because I'm not a Jamal Hill fan. I think he's been talking, a lot of shit online. He kind of embarrassed himself with the whole Alex Pineda situation at the PI, the way he got KO'd at UFC 300. But from what we've seen from Yuri Prochazka, I think people tend to forget how good of a fighter Jamal Hill actually is. I know he doesn't have the best technique. I know he's not the most technical guy. But other than losing, to Alex Pineda, who's one of the best strikers that we've ever seen in the UFC, he was on an absolute tear, right? He went out there and beat the brakes off Glover Teixeira to win the light heavyweight title, goes out there, gets a finish over Thiago Santos, goes out there with that crazy KO over Johnny Walker, goes out there, starches Jimmy Crute. This guy has dangerous power, and I think in terms of the technique defensively, Jamal Hill does leave himself open at times, but that is usually when he throws his offense, he neglects the defense, to where Yuri Prochazka, he has no defense ever, and that is really the problem for me in this fight, is if you get hit by Jamal Hill, he can put anybody out in this weight class, and I think Jamal Hill has a fire to him. I think he's motivated, and while I don't like the guy, I think he is very dangerous, and he has a good skill set that people are forgetting about because of all the BS that's happened with Pineda. And on the other side, we got Yuri Prochazka. Yuri Prochazka, one of my favorite guys in the division. My heart's with Yuri. I'll be rooting for him in this fight. I hope he proves me wrong. If I could please get a fight wrong on the card, make it this one. But my brain is telling me Hill, man. It just is, because Yuri Prochazka, what we've seen, he KO'd Dominic Reyes. Reyes had some success at times in that fight. Goes out there against Glover Teixeira. It was a war. It was a war against Glover Teixeira. And Jamal Hill, it was not a war against Glover Teixeira. Jamal Hill beat the brakes off of Glover Teixeira. And then he goes out there, gets KO'd by Alex Pineda. People are like, early stoppage, early stoppage. I don't know about that. Then goes out there and, he's getting beat up by Alexander Rakic, getting his legs shredded apart to where he just bit down on the mouthpiece and said, I'm not losing tonight. And the warrior samurai spirit took over, willed his way to a victory, and was able to finish Alexander Rakic. Goes out there, gets brutally KO'd by Alex Pineda 5 months ago. What kind of Yuri do we see? Do we see a tentative guy who just got KO'd again out of 3 fights? He got KO'd twice and took a lot of damage in the Rakic fight, even though he won. And I think Yuri's chinny, man. I don't think he has the best chin. He doesn't have very good defense. While he has crazy power and he's very awkward and very dynamic, I think Jamal Hill's going to wait, going to sit on the back foot, and when Yuri lunges in to throw those shots, Jamal's going to slip out of range and land some nasty shots with the boxing, because I do believe Jamal does have decent technique. He can get a little reckless, forget about the defense at times. I think he is a little bit more defensively responsible than Yuri Prochazka, because I think whoever lands the first clean shot is going to knock the other guy out. I think someone's getting knocked out within 2 rounds. I think Jamal Hill is motivated. He's determined to try to get one back on Alex Pineda. I think Hill goes out there and finds a KO. He will be healthy coming into this. I think he finds a shot on the chin of Yuri Prochazka that puts him out. I think Jamal Hill, my brain's telling me Hill, heart says Yuri. I'm going with my brain. I think Jamal Hill is able to win this one by finish. Moving on, co-main event. If you're looking for an in-depth breakdown, I will go ahead and link this one down below. Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Look, Umar Nurmagomedov, I think, is the most skilled fighter in the entire bantamweight division. He has outstanding striking, he has outstanding grappling, and very, very good submissions. And there's a reason Merab wasn't excited for this fight, right? Merab was glazing Petr Yan, glazing Sean O'Malley. He was looking for a very winnable, favorable stylistic matchup in terms of his first title defense, which can't hate on that, right? He kind of wanted to lay up to defend the title, but he finds himself against the hardest. If I was going to build a fighter to go in there and take out Merab, I would build a fighter that looks like Umar, a guy that has very dynamic striking, very good kicks, very good grappling, and submissions on top of that. And that's what this comes down to for me. Merab has been very dominant, right? And what we've seen from Merab since he's been on the run, goes out there, is able to finish Marlon Moraes, goes out there, dominates Jose Aldo, pushes him up against the fence, controls him. 50-45's Petr Yan. I'll never forgive him for that. What he was able to do to Petr Yan. Goes out there, dominates Henry Cejudo. Goes out there, beats Sean O'Malley to win the title. He's been on a tear. He has a very, very good resume at bantamweight. But for me, I just think Umar is able to negate what Merab does well. Merab weaponizes cardio and wrestling and pace and pressure against all of his opponents. Who could probably stop the takedowns? Umar. Who has better submissions here? Umar. Who has better striking on the feet? Umar by far. So in terms of that, unless Merab puts a pace on him that Umar can't keep up with, I think Umar just outstrikes Merab. I think he keeps the fight on the feet. And if Merab decides to spam a bunch of takedowns, Umar can threaten with submissions. And if you tell me that this fight goes to decision, I could see Umar winning a decision that way. But I really believe that if Merab comes in aggressive, angry, pissed off like he think he's going to be, I think he will get a little reckless. He will spam those takedowns where he won't be in the best position to where Umar can hurt him, find a good position, and ultimately find a submission. I'm going a 3rd round submission victory for Umar Nurmagomedov. It's hard to win decisions over Merab, man. He's a dominant decision win fighter. I think Umar could possibly find a finish in this, or he puts on a mixed martial arts clinic and wins a decision over Merab. But if Alien Merab shows up, anything's possible. But I believe Umar is the guy to beat Merab. I've been saying it for a long time. I think Umar gets it done. Last but not least, the main event of the evening. I did an in-depth breakdown for this that I will link down below as well. I think Islam Makhachev is able to finish Arman Tsarukyan in the later rounds in this matchup. Now, I think this is the hardest stylistic fight in the division for Islam, right? These guys fought back in 2019. Arman Tsarukyan has improved leaps and bounds since then. Islam has also improved leaps and bounds since then. But to me, the difference is the striking. While Arman has good power, while we've seen that against Beneil Dariush, goes out there and got that nasty finish over Benny Dariush, goes out there, dominates Charles Oliveira with the grappling, tunes him up on the feet. Charles Oliveira didn't look like he wanted to be there, man. He was hesitant. He wasn't pulling the trigger on anything. And he just kind of looked like the ghost of Oliveira in there. And what we've seen, Islam Makhachev do, goes out there, dominates Bobby Green, goes out there, dominates Charles Oliveira, and finishes him, right? So Arman went in there and controlled him. Islam got a finish. Makhachev goes in there, beats Alexander Volkanovski in a very tough fight, beats him in the rematch, finishes him with a beautiful high kick setup, and then goes out there in an absolute dogfight against Dustin Poirier and finds that late Darce choke late in the fight. So what we've seen from Islam, he's been battle tested, was in there against a Poirier on that night who was going to be able to go toe-to-toe with anybody. Poirier had already made it up in his mind. This is probably my last fight. You could tell by the way he was fighting. It was going to take a crazy effort from Islam to win the fight. Makhachev has improved more since the first Arman fight. I think Arman, he's always had good wrestling. He's always had power. He's very explosive, very dynamic. But I think Islam is the cleaner, technical, better striker. And that's what this comes down to. If we see grappling, I could see Arman maybe have a little success here and there. But I think Islam is still the better grappler. He chains things together very well. He's got very good submissions, very good control, very good trips in close. I believe Islam's striking is going to be the difference in this matchup, and coming off of those crazy fights with Volkanovski and Poirier, that has only helped Islam coming into a fight like this to where we know he can dig deep, we know he can bite down on the mouthpiece and slug it out if he has to. I think the grappling cancels out at times and we see a good back and forth strikers battle. I think Islam Makhachev wins that over Arman Tsarukyan. But again, Arman's explosive, he's dangerous, and he has very good submission defense. We saw that when he was, doing the grappling stuff against Hamzat Chimaev. I was impressed with Arman's grappling. I don't think that he has improved enough to take out a guy as good as Islam Makhachev, who I believe is the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the sport and in the UFC right now. I think Islam is able to find a finish in the championship round. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I would appreciate it. See you next time.